He didn't put her in a cell, he put her in the library. The suite had 12-foot shelves lined with first editions, a stone fireplace big enough to stand in, and a wall of glass overlooking the Cascade Range, 300 feet of granite and old-growth fir between Gemma Solis and the nearest road. Lucan Stahl thought isolation would unravel her. He expected panic, bargaining, tears. What he got instead was a woman who spent the first 2 hours cataloguing his book collection by author surname, and who, by the time dinner arrived, had filled 4 pages of the notepad she'd found in the desk drawer with the financial discrepancies she'd memorized before his men took her laptop. She hadn't written them down to incriminate him. She'd written them down because her brain never stopped working, and numbers had a way of sitting behind her eyes like a low-grade headache until she got them on paper. The room was absurd. It smelled like cedar smoke and old leather. The chair they'd left her was a butter-soft wingback in dark green velvet. The fireplace crackled on its own timer. It was the most comfortable prison she'd ever heard of, which said something uncomfortable about the man who'd built it. Gemma stood at the window and watched a hawk work the updrafts above the tree line below. Her hands were perfectly still at her sides. She was still wearing the blazer and slacks she'd had on at the audit yesterday morning, and her feet ached from the heels she'd refused to take off. Removing her shoes felt like surrender, and she was not surrendering anything. 7 years. She'd spent 7 years building a reputation as the most meticulous forensic accountant in the Pacific Northwest. She'd grown up with nothing, raised by a grandmother in a Portland walk-up that flooded every February, put herself through school on grants and night shifts, clawed her way to a corner office she was technically still leasing, by the month because the lease on permanence hadn't come through yet. She was not going to unravel in a mountain lodge because some man with cold eyes and a good suit had decided she was inconvenient. She had found the anomaly in the Vantage Holdings wire transfers at 11:43 a.m. By noon, she'd traced it through 3 shell corporations back to a data brokerage with no public footprint and a very specific client list. By 12:15, 2 men in expensive coats had appeared in the doorway of the conference room. By 12:45, she was in the back of an armored SUV heading north on I-5. She hadn't screamed. She'd noted the license plate, the brand of the driver's watch, and the scar running through the passenger's left eyebrow, knife wound, not surgery. Stahl was meticulous. She could respect that, even if she couldn't forgive it. The fire snapped. Gemma walked back to the desk, sat down, and looked at her 4 pages of notes. If she was going to be a prisoner, she was at least going to be a productive one. 3 days passed. She didn't see him until the 4th evening. The room had a weak Wi-Fi signal on a secured server that gave her access to a curated catalogue of e-books and nothing else. She read 2 of them. She also found a box of drafting pencils in the bottom desk drawer and spent one afternoon recreating, entirely from memory, a complete network diagram of the shell corporations she'd identified, 23 entities, every pass-through account, every routing number that had surfaced in her mind during those 3 hours of work before his men arrived. She was staring at it when the lock turned. He was taller than she'd registered in the first confusing minutes of her abduction. 6'2", heavy through the shoulders, deliberate in his movements, the way large men sometimes were when they'd learned their size was its own kind of loaded weapon. His dark suit was expensive and slightly wrinkled, the collar of his shirt open at the throat. He looked like a man who had been awake for 36 hours and was running on something grimmer than caffeine. He stopped 3 feet inside the door and looked at the network diagram spread across the desk. A long silence. "You did that from memory," Stahl said, not a question. "I have a good memory," Gemma said. She didn't stand. She held his gaze and kept her hands flat on the desk over the diagram, particularly for numbers that don't add up. He crossed to the chair opposite without being invited. He moved like a man who had never once waited for permission. He studied her the way she imagined he studied financial reports, systematically without sentimentality. "Are you afraid of me?" Stahl asked. "I'm annoyed," Gemma said. I had a client presentation on Friday. I missed it. My client is going to assume I poached their files and disappeared, which is, frankly, an insult to my professional reputation. Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, more like recalibration. Like he'd been expecting a different register entirely and was adjusting his assessment accordingly. You traced the Vantage transfers through to my holding layer, he said. Through 3 shells, yes. The routing was clean, but whoever structured the transfers used a timing cadence that's distinctive. It matches a pattern I've seen in legitimate high-volume offshore arbitrage. Which means whoever set it up was mimicking legal behavior intentionally. She paused. That's not an amateur move. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What were you planning to do with what you found? Document it, redact it from my deliverable, and bill for exactly the work I was contracted to do. She watched him process that. I'm a forensic accountant, not a federal informant. I grew up in a neighborhood where the fastest way to get hurt was to see things that weren't your business. I was going to walk out that door and forget I ever looked at your wire transfers. You had enough to bring down 3 primary holding entities. I had enough to know that whatever you're running isn't my problem. She let that sit for a moment. You didn't give me the chance to leave. The fire gave a low snap. Outside, the mountains had gone dark under a sky pressing full of clouds. You built this from memory, he said again, looking at the diagram. Every entity. And 2 sub-tier entities your men missed when they took my laptop. I didn't include those on the diagram. They're in my head. They'll stay there as long as I have no reason to put them somewhere else. Another silence, this one longer. What do you want? Stahl asked. She looked at him without blinking. To leave. That's not possible yet. Then give me a full database connection and let me do something useful. She tapped the diagram. You have a problem in your secondary financial layer. Someone inside your organization is siphoning from the Vantage operating reserves, and they know your audit cycle, which means they knew I was coming before I arrived. Whoever brought me into that conference room may have been hoping I'd find something that pointed in the wrong direction. She kept her voice level. You have a leak, and it's close. Stahl went very still. The kind of stillness that wasn't calm. It was the absence of motion that precedes something significant. I sent a flag through your compliance officer at Vantage 3 weeks ago, Gemma continued. Irregular timing on the intercompany transfers, perfectly aligned to the gaps between your internal review windows. You didn't read it. She paused, but your leak did. 4 days after I filed that report, $2.3 million moved out of the reserve account. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Stahl stood up. He walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame, his back to her. I'll have a hardline terminal set up tomorrow, he said. Local server access only. That's all I need, Gemma said. He left. The lock engaged. She pressed her fingertips to her temples and let out a slow, careful breath. Her hands were shaking slightly. She had not let him see that. She was very good at not letting people see things. The terminal arrived the next morning. By nightfall, she had a name. Stahl came back just after 8, and this time he didn't hesitate at the door. He came straight to the desk and leaned over her shoulder to look at the screen, and she registered, neutrally, clinically, the smell of black coffee and pine cold, like he'd been outside in the mountain air. His shoulder nearly grazed hers. He didn't pull back. Renfield, she said, you're head of operations. Look at the transaction timestamps. These micro-transfers are fragmented to stay under the automatic flag threshold, but when you aggregate them across all subsidiary accounts over 18 months, it's $4.1 million. She pointed to a column of figures. He also authorized 2 additions to the Cascade routing hub that don't appear on any org chart in your system. Ghost payroll. He's funding outside contacts through legitimate compensation channels. Stahl's breathing had changed. She could feel it, a slight shift, shallower, controlled. Renfield has been with me 11 years, he said quietly. Loyalty depreciates, Gemma said. She hadn't planned the words. They came out the way true things sometimes did, without enough warning to be stopped, especially in industries where money moves faster than trust. He turned his head. They were closer than was professionally appropriate for any context, let alone this one. In the amber light from the desk lamp, she could see the scar that curved under his jaw, faded, old, the kind that comes from something survived and never discussed. "Why aren't you trying to leave?" he asked. The calculation was gone from it entirely. It was just a man genuinely puzzled by something he couldn't categorize. Gemma considered deflecting. She was good at that, presenting only the parts of herself that served the situation. But there was something in his face, some deep exhaustion at the structural level, that made the performance feel like too much effort. "Because I've been running my entire life," she said, "and I'm tired. And right now, the most interesting problem in front of me is this one." She tapped the screen. "You've got a leak in your operations layer, a rival firm using your own contractor network to steal your clients, and a $4.1 million hole in your books. I can solve 2 of those things. The third one is yours." He looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who has been very certain about something for a long time and has just discovered the certainty was wrong. "No one in my organization speaks to me that way," he said. "I noticed," Gemma said. "It's probably part of why Renfield thought he could get away with it." Something moved across his face that she decided not to name. He straightened, and when he spoke again, the controlled cadence was back but thinner, more deliberate. "I'll have the full operations database access added to your terminal by morning." He left, the lock engaged. This time the sound of it didn't feel like a trap, it felt like a decision. He was gone for 2 days. She knew something was wrong before the second morning ended. The woman who brought her meals stopped meeting her eyes. The guard rotation in the hallway changed twice in one afternoon. After midnight, she watched 3 vehicles pull into the service road below with their headlights off. Gemma sat in the wingback chair with her knees drawn up and calculated. She was not a person given to fear. She was a person given to options, exit costs, decision trees, expected values. The problem was that every branch kept resolving to the same point. Whatever was happening outside this room, the man who'd locked her in it was in the middle of it, and his survival was, inconveniently, now her cleanest available outcome. She did not examine that too closely. At 2:07 a.m., the terminal connection dropped. At 2:43 a.m., the lock clicked open. He was standing in the doorway in a dark shirt with the collar torn, his left hand pressed flat against his ribs. In the low light from the hallway, the stain spreading through the fabric looked black. He took 1 step forward and his knee buckled. Gemma was off the chair before any conscious decision had been made. She caught him, barely. He had 8 inches and 80 pounds on her, and redirected his fall from the floor to the wall. He slid against it, breathing in short, uneven pulls. "Renfield's outside contacts moved tonight," he said. His voice was stripped down to its foundation, flat and very controlled in the way that meant the alternative was losing control entirely. "We took the primary position, but I walked into a secondary." "Stop talking." She had her hand over his. The heat of it was startling. "Move your hand." "It's not clean, Morgan." "Gemma," she said, not sharply, just precisely. "Move your hand." He moved it. It was bad, a deep laceration along the lower rib cage, not a bullet wound but something jagged, something serrated, bleeding hard but not the kind that left minutes instead of hours. Her mind ran its inventory automatically. First aid kit, cabinet under the bathroom sink. She'd clocked it on day 1. Suture kit she'd noticed when she catalogued the room. Clean linens. "Bathroom," she said. "Can you stand?" Yes. He didn't sound certain. She'd learned in 4 days that Stahl operated in binary, yes and no, with very little tolerance for the gradient between. She had found, against her better judgment, that she understood that. It took several agonizing minutes to get him there. She bore a frightening amount of his weight across the room. He left a trail of dark smears across the hardwood floor. She found the first aid kit where she expected it. Heavy, military grade, the kind that tells you everything you need to know about the person who stocked it. She laid the supplies on the rim of the sink. Her hands were steady. She noted this with mild surprise. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I know," Stahl said. She poured the antiseptic. He made a sound that had nothing articulate in it, and his good hand shot out and gripped the edge of the sink so hard the tendons in his forearm stood up like cables. She gave him 5 seconds and then continued. "Who else is in the building?" she asked, threading the needle. Keeping him talking was the right call clinically. And also, she admitted, the right call personally. His voice steadied her too, though she filed that observation away rather than sitting with it. Paxton, 3 of his team, they held the east wing. A pause bitten short. Renfield's dead. His contacts pulled back when Paxton engaged, but they're regrouping. She worked steadily, asking questions between stitches, listening to the shape of the answers as much as the content. When she tied the last suture and sat back on her heels, she looked at him properly. He'd gone the color of old paper, sweat across his forehead, but his eyes were open and tracking, following her, specifically, with a focus that had nothing tired in it. "You came here," she said. He understood exactly what she meant by it. "There are 40 people in this building," Stahl said, his voice worn to its base material. "Paxton and his team are the only ones I'm certain of. Everyone else." He stopped. "When someone's already been paid, there's nothing left to negotiate." An armed compound full of men who served him, and he'd dragged himself to the locked room of the woman he'd brought here by force, because it was the only room in the building he knew was safe. She said nothing about that. She stood, found the gauze, and wrapped his ribs with the focused economy of someone who had decided that the emotional dimension of this moment would wait for a better hour. "The security grid," she said. "Is there a hardline terminal I can reach from this wing?" "The study. 2 doors. Access codes." A pause, longer than any previous pause, the kind that had real weight in it. The codes to the security grid were the central nervous system of everything he ran. She watched him understand that she knew this. He gave her the codes. She did not sleep. By the time pale grey light began at the high window, she had locked down the estate's eastern security grid, rerouted communication channels to the study terminal, located the staging position of Renfield's remaining contacts from their satellite phone signatures, and placed a call to Paxton with specific and non-negotiable instructions. Paxton had not been pleased to receive instructions from her. She had explained, in the calm register she used when talking clients through audit findings they didn't want to hear, that she currently held administrative access to the estate's financial infrastructure, which included compensation accounts for every member of his security team. She had been very polite about it. Paxton had done what she asked. Stahl was awake when she came back, propped against the headboard with color returning slowly to his face. He looked at the window, then at her. "It's done," Gemma said. "Paxton moved at 4:30. Renfield's network is fully mapped. He was selling your client routing data to Archon Analytics. They've been using it to approach your accounts directly with counteroffers, carving off your client base slowly enough that you'd attribute the losses to normal attrition." She sat down. "They didn't have enough to expose you. They just needed to bleed you quietly." Stahl was quiet for a long moment. The mountains outside had gone the color of old copper in the early light. "You built their entire operational map," he said. "You gave me a hardline connection and a long night." She folded her hands in her lap. "Don't give me credit for doing the only thing available to me." He looked at her differently then. Not the systematic assessment she'd grown accustomed to over 4 days. Something underneath it, less managed, the expression of a man who has held a specific understanding of himself for a long time and has just found the first crack in it. "The gate code changes in 40 minutes, he said, his voice very level. "You have the rotation access from last night. You know the service road. Paxton's men are at the perimeter, not the gate." He paused. "I'm in no condition to stop you." "I know," Gemma said. She didn't look at the door. He waited. "I stayed because the work wasn't finished," she said. And because the financial infrastructure of this organization is a documented disaster that no one with actual precision has ever been turned loose on, and that is, professionally speaking, deeply offensive to me. She looked at him directly, and because the only person in this building who was paying any real attention was you, and you were paying attention to me. She said it like an observation, not a confession. I haven't had that in a long time. The quiet between them was different from all the previous quiet. It had weight, but not the pressing kind. Stahl pushed himself upright, slowly, with the deliberate care of a man who had learned to work around pain. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her chair. Renfield's role, he said. Operations, financial oversight, everything he was supposed to be covering. She raised an eyebrow. You're offering me his position. I'm acknowledging a structural failure and identifying the most qualified resource currently available. He paused. Yes, I'm offering you the position. I already had a position. You had a position. Your client terminated the engagement yesterday at noon. Breach of confidentiality. She stared at him. You? I didn't, they assumed. Something that was not quite apology moved across his face. You were collected from their conference room by my men. They drew their own conclusions. Gemma sat with that. 7 years of reputation. Every referral she'd earned. Every difficult engagement she'd handled without flinching. Every professional relationship built on the understanding that she was the person who didn't make mistakes. Gone because a man had decided she was inconvenient and the fallout had been automatic. She felt the anger fully, filed it, set it aside. Salary, she said, not consulting fees. Salary, full benefits, and a contract that specifically enumerates my authority over all financial infrastructure. No one in this organization moves money without my approval. He looked at her steadily. The authority you're describing is significant. The damage Renfield did with significantly less authority is $4.1 million and still growing, she said. Do the math, Stahl. Something in his face settled, the way a long column of figures settles when the final line finally balances. Terms accepted, he said. She stood up. She was still in the wrinkled blazer, still in the heels she had not removed in 4 days. She held out her hand. He looked at it. He looked at her. The expression on his face was not the expression of a man closing a transaction. He took her hand. His grip was warm and very steady, and he held it 1 beat longer than the formality required. You understand, Stahl said quietly, that knowing what you know about this organization makes walking away structurally impossible. I understood that on day 1, Gemma said. I'm not walking away. Then we have a complication, he said, because I'm not capable of maintaining the distance that the arrangement would ordinarily require. She pulled her hand back. She turned toward the door, which she had chosen not to open for 4 days, which had been unlocked for the last 3 hours, which she was choosing not to open now either. The arrangement, she said, stopped being ordinary the moment you put a forensic accountant in a library full of first editions and expected her to fall apart. She glanced back at him over her shoulder. Rest. I have a full financial reconstruction to complete from memory, a $4.1 million legal documentation to build, and an operation structure to redesign before the end of the quarter. She walked out into the hallway, past the guards who tracked her with careful, neutral expressions. Toward the study where the terminal was still glowing, where the numbers were waiting for her, specific and insistent, and entirely hers to arrange. Behind her, she heard him exhale, low and long, the sound of a man releasing something he'd held tightly for longer than it was sustainable to hold anything. She was not his prisoner. She had not been his prisoner. Not really. Not since she chose to stay in a room with an unlocked door. She was the woman who'd mapped his entire network from a room full of first editions, stitched him together in the dark, dismantled his enemies before the sun came up, and walked out of his house without running. The most dangerous person in any room is never the one holding the weapon. It's the one who already knows exactly where everything is buried and has decided deliberately to stay.